Well, welcome everybody to the webinar. I've been looking forward to sharing this Dacxi Chain update with everybody for a few weeks now. Just to make it clear, what we've decided to do is I'm going to give a Dacxi Chain update presentation every month. Okay, so this is the first for 2024, but it's also the first in a series of updates that we're going to provide where I present to everybody once a month. And the intention of that is to make sure that you understand our progress and you understand the milestones that we're working towards and you understand how we're tracking against those. But the other side of this is we want to also share with you on a regular basis any industry developments. We think that's really important because that gives all of you some context through which to better understand the development of the Dacxi Chain proposition and the product and the building of the partners network. Okay, so this session is being recorded. That recording will be shared with absolutely everybody. So for anyone that's unable to attend the webinar, you certainly don't miss out. You can view this at your own time of your own choosing. So look, without any more ado, let's get into the presentation. You'll be pleased to know it's only about a dozen slides. It's not too long. At the end of the presentation, I'm also going to answer some questions. So we invited people to send in questions to ask me at dacxichain.com. I'm really pleased to say we got a bunch of questions. Some of them were really, really good. And I think the answers to those questions is helpful for everybody. So I'll be running through those as well. And as always, we would encourage you, any questions at any time, please send them through to ask me at dacxichain.com, and we will endeavour to answer all of those questions through these sessions and other sessions that we hold from time to time. Okay, so look, let's get into it. You can see here that the name of this presentation is Building the Network, and the reason that I want to focus in this presentation on sharing with you some information about how we're tracking with building this network of equity crowdfunding platform partners that creates the Dacxi Chain proposition is because it is the single most fundamental thing that we're doing right now to build towards the future and build towards the use case for Dacxi Coin at scale. Okay, so understanding how we're tracking with building the network, understanding what the future of that looks like and how we're planning for it, understanding the partners we're working with, understanding the timelines associated with all of that. That's really central, not just to the work that we're doing, but to your understanding of how we're developing the Dacxi Chain proposition. Okay, so let's jump into that. I'm just going to start by explaining a little bit about why building the network is actually so critical. Why is it key to our future success? So the first thing, and possibly the most important thing, is that every new partner we sign to the Dacxi Chain network is an unambiguous validation of the proposition that we offer and the market opportunity that proposition creates. Okay, every partner that comes into this network is already operating an equity crowdfunding platform. They understand their market. They understand the regulations in that market. They understand what it takes to actually raise capital for early stage and growth businesses. They've got a wealth of experience and expertise. And so when they turn around and say, we want to be part of Dacxi Chain, I think what that does is very clearly validates what we're doing, the thinking behind it, and the way we're going about it. So that validation should be very encouraging to everybody. It's certainly really important for us. I think the other thing that most of you would probably understand intuitively is that every new partner we sign makes it more compelling for other partners to join as well. Okay, so with the credibility that comes with signing more partners, the partners that we don't have take more and more notice of what we're doing. The credibility grows, and with that, I think the likelihood that they start to come to us. I'm going to talk about that very specifically in a moment. So success breeds success is a simple way to put that. The next point is that I touched on earlier. So new partners contribute knowledge and experience specific to their markets, and we leverage that knowledge and experience to make sure that our platform manages everything it needs to manage. Okay. So particularly when it comes to any nuances specific to one market or one jurisdiction, any requirements around the regulations in that particular market or jurisdiction, our partners will help us understand what we need to do to make it easy for them to use our platform in those markets. Okay. We don't have to have the answer to every question because our partners do. And so this is the nature of the relationship we have with our partners. It's not just about getting their vote of confidence that they think what we're doing is really important and they want to be part of it. We are saying to them, we want you to actively contribute to our understanding of what you need in your market for this to be a seamless, frictionless proposition for you and for your teams to be using. Okay, so there's huge value in that, and we actively engage with our partners in that way, and that will be an ongoing and growing part of the work that we do. And then the final point here is really a corollary of all the points above, which is that as we sign new partners, it accelerates the delivery against the business plan. It accelerates the commencement and the growth of our deal flow. And of course, what follows from that is acceleration of revenue. And I think everyone can agree that's incredibly important. So look, moving on, we've shared in the past some numbers around the number of partners around the world that we plan to sign over the next 12, 24 months. And we believe that this is a really good balance of what is achievable, but also our ambition to build the world's first equity crowdfunding network, and to do that on a global scale. So those numbers are really important. But there's actually some other ways that we look at the growth of the network that is actually more important than just the raw numbers. And that is understanding the different stages that you need to achieve, or the different milestones we need to achieve in the process of building a great network that becomes a great business. Okay. So the way that we think about that is really these three stages I want to explain to you. So the first stage is what we call the tipping point. And I alluded to this earlier briefly. So the tipping point is the point at which we have enough credibility through the partners that we've already signed, who are now a network. We have enough credibility that we can announce that very publicly to the industry, and the industry will start coming to us. So keep in mind, to this point, we've been going to the industry. There is a point where that dynamic shifts, and that's this tipping point. This point where we have enough credibility with enough partners across enough different geographical jurisdictions, that tipping point means that the industry will start to come to us. So that's a very important milestone as it relates to building the network. The second milestone that we look at is what we call critical mass. And critical mass just simply means that we now have enough partners with enough activity and enough deal flow going through the network that we have a standalone viable ecosystem. It's a self-sustaining proposition, okay? In theory, when we get to critical mass, we don't need to grow anymore because we're generating profits. The deal flow is growing in terms of what's being pushed through the network, and that ecosystem is entirely viable, okay? So that's the second milestone that we focus on when we think about the stages of building a network. And then the third is this idea of exponential growth. So our growth curve is steep but linear. We get to stage 3, and it's really where the continued growth in the number of partners exponentially accelerates our growth in the number of deals that go through the network, through this network effect, which you've all heard me talk about previously. And at that point, you know, we've got really a spectacular business. We've got much more than just a leadership advantage. We've built a moat around the Dacxi Chain proposition through the development of this network. So the network is really, in many ways, as valuable and as important as the actual technology and IP that sits within the infrastructure that we offer, okay? So that's why I wanted to talk today about building the network. We've got some clear numbers we want to hit over the next couple of years. But beyond those numbers, there are three really important stages that we need to remain laser focused on achieving, that will make sure that we get not just to the numbers that we want, but that we create a fantastic, spectacularly profitable business in the process of doing that. Okay. So the first of these milestones is the tipping point. And this is the point at which we have enough partners with enough jurisdictional diversity that the industry starts to come to us. Really important milestone. Okay. So what I want to do is give you an update as it relates to how are we tracking specific to achieving this tipping point. And so the headline here is that the tipping point is actually really quite close. So the way that we think about the tipping point is that we believe with 7 or maybe 8 foundation partners, we achieve the tipping point. In other words, we are at a point where we can tell the whole world very loudly, that is the equity crowdfunding world, about the fact that not we're building a network, but we have built a network, and that industry will start to come to us because it's obviously very interesting for them. And I think many of the platforms in market today will realize that it's not just interesting, it's actually really quite important for their own future to take a really close look at what we're doing and be a part of it. So just a quick update in relation to achieving this tipping point of 7 or maybe 8 platforms. So at the end of the year, last year, 2023, many of you will know that we had started working with 3 partners. And those 3 partners are Angels Den in the UK, Equitize in Australia, New Zealand, and Snowball Effect, primarily operating in New Zealand. Okay, so 3 really well-established, very credible platforms that at the end of last year, we'd already started to collaborate closely with. I am delighted to be able to share with you and announce for the first time that as early as the beginning of this year in January, we signed an additional partner, a European-based equity crowdfunding platform called Crowded Hero. Crowded Hero is based in their home markets, really the Baltic markets of Europe, and they're actively expanding out their footprint across all 27 of the countries within the European Union. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment because there's some very interesting industry developments happening there. But we are absolutely delighted to have our first European-based partner, and that essentially means that we now have a partner that gives us, through their own growth, access to the 27 markets that constitute the European territory. So a little bit about Crowded Hero. This is a business founded by some incredibly smart, very accomplished corporate finance and private banking professionals. So these aren't tech people that decided to get into equity crowdfunding. These are people that come from capital markets and understand the way that investment works and understand the way that equity is raised and capital is raised by growth companies. Okay. What's interesting about Crowded Hero is they do all of the work in the early stage sector, as do most, if not all, equity crowdfunding platforms. But they also do quite a bit of work with more established companies raising larger amounts of capital. Okay. So these are businesses that may have already gone through a growth phase. In that context, they represent lower risk for the investor, and they're typically raising larger amounts of capital. So Crowded Hero, in that sense, I think is a wonderful partner for us, and it's an organisation that has really good connections across the whole of the European territory. So they've got advisors, they've got partners and board members across the whole of Europe. So we're really excited about having Crowded Hero as part of the team. Huge stamp of credibility again for Dacxi Chain. One very big step closer to achieving our tipping point, the point at which the industry starts to come to us. Now, what this means is that through the partners we now have, the Dacxi Chain network already has global geographical coverage. Let's just quickly go through that. Crowded Hero provides access to 27 countries. We've got a partner in the UK, partners in Australia and New Zealand. So this already gives us geographical coverage of 30 countries around the world, which is phenomenal. So again, Crowded Hero is a wonderful partner for us in the context of the broader European Union. And I'm going to talk specifically about some developments specific to the European territory in a moment. Okay, so really, really good news in terms of the building of the network and moving towards our tipping point. I think what's particularly important is to help you understand where we are in relation to signing the additional partners that we would need to get to our tipping point. Okay, so what I can share with you today is that we are in discussions with 6 additional equity crowdfunding partners, and those partners come from territories across the European Union, again, 27 countries, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, but also across new jurisdictions, including the Americas and Southeast Asia. So look, that's enormously exciting because it doesn't just add, as we start to sign some of these partners, it doesn't just add to the number of partners, but it further extends on our geographical coverage, which is incredibly important. And that also is another great way of demonstrating that the industry globally is validating the Dacxi Chain vision, is that we're not just signing partners in 1 or 2 or 3 markets, but around the world in a whole range of very diverse jurisdictions. Okay, so if you look at these 6 additional partners, just to be clear, we're talking about meetings with CEOs. We are in discussion. These companies are interested. They understand the proposition. They want to understand a little bit more of the detail. They've got questions. So we're toing and froing and having meetings with these 6 additional partners because they're interested, and we're dealing with CEOs, and I'm leading that process personally. Okay, answering their questions and working closely with those companies so that they understand exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. All right, so look, the good news is I would expect that we'd be in a position to announce some additional partners soon. And of course, as we sign additional partners, we're very quickly closing in on our tipping point milestone, the point at which we think the industry will start to come to us in a way that will accelerate our growth of the network and everything else that flows from that. So look, I'm just going to, a little bit tangential, but I want to share with you in these updates every month any industry-wide developments that are relevant. Okay, I think it's really useful for our community to understand what's happening in the broader equity crowdfunding world, and any significant development. So there's one very significant development that's quite recent that I wanted to talk about today. So just to set the scene on this, the European Union is 27 member states or countries, and historically, those 27 countries have all operated 100% independently of each other as it relates to equity crowdfunding. So 27 different legal jurisdictions, 27 different sets of regulatory frameworks, or in some cases, no regulatory frameworks. And so, the European Union is essentially one large territory, but it actually operated as 27 individual markets. So the European Union looked at this and said, look, we need to simplify this in a way that benefits the companies that want access to growth capital and the investors that want access to those investments. So in November of 2020, the EU announced a transition from multiple separate member regulations to one singular regulatory framework that encompasses all 27 EU member states equally. Okay, so in other words, 27 sets of rules to one set of rules for all of those markets. And when they announced that in November 2020, the industry in Europe, the platforms that offer equity crowdfunding, were given 2 years to meet these new regulatory standards. Okay, so they said, look, these standards are a little bit different to what you've been operating under. Many of the rules were similar or the same, but some were different. So we're going to give you 2 years to make sure you're compliant and in position, and then we'll flick the switch. They then extended that in 2022, realizing that some of those equity crowdfunding companies wouldn't be ready. They extended that by 12 months to November 2023. So look, the short version of all this is that in November of last year, the switch was flicked and a singular regulatory framework was deployed for all 27 EU member states. Now, this is a really material development and overwhelmingly positive, not just for the industry in that territory, but also for Dacxi Chain. So some of those benefits include, for a start, if you're an EU-based equity crowdfunding platform, you can now effectively expand into the whole European Union, and you can do it under one set of rules. So it makes expansion across those different markets really very seamless and much cheaper and more practically achievable for all of those equity crowdfunding platforms in Europe. Okay, so really good for them. That, of course, is good for us, because if we have partners in Europe, which we do, it means that their growth opportunity is also aligned to Dacxi Chain. Okay, so that's really positive for us as well. One of the really big benefits is perhaps the obvious one that everyone can see, which is that instead of creating a platform that manages for 27 different ways of doing equity crowdfunding, we now have to build a platform that provides for one set of rules for that whole 27 country territory. Okay, it means that the product development required to be compliant and to allow our partners in Europe to be compliant is significantly less complicated. I mean, more than 20 times less complicated. Okay, so that reduction in complexity is game changing for us, because it means that we can actually achieve a product outcome where all of those operators are compliant much more easily. Okay, which just means faster and cheaper. That's good. And then the outcome of all of that is that it makes the scale that we're targeting much more achievable, not just for the partners that operate in those markets, but obviously for us looking to build this network effect, and it makes that achievable much faster. Okay, so this is a development that I think fits into that category of interesting or important. In our case, it's actually really important. We've been keeping a close eye on this. We weren't entirely confident that they wouldn't extend the changeover by another 12 months, but they didn't. So in November of last year, this became law in Europe, and this is incredibly positive for Dacxi Chain. Okay, particularly in the context of us now signing partners in Europe. Okay, so going back to this idea of reaching the tipping point, I think what we've now realized is that we're actually on track to reach this tipping point ahead of schedule. So if we take the 4 partners we already have with all that geographical coverage of 30 markets, and we take into account the 6 additional partners we're well into discussions with CEOs, what we're saying is we expect to get to our target of 7 or 8 partners that is this tipping point ahead of what we originally anticipated. So if this chart here represents when we expected that we would reach the tipping point, really what we're saying is we think that's going to come sooner. Okay, we're ahead of schedule. That's obviously incredibly positive, and we're very excited about that. I think one of the really interesting things that many of you will already have thought about is that if we can reach the tipping point ahead of schedule, does that mean we can also grow the network and reach critical mass and exponential growth? The second and third stages, can we reach those ahead of schedule as well? And look, our view on that is quite possibly. Okay, we're not making any predictions or promises in relation to those timelines, but to be ahead of schedule at this stage of building the network, to have that amount of geographical coverage, to have the benefit of these EU regulations becoming law in November last year, just a few months ago, all of that is really positive for us. The number of partners we're in discussion with CEOs, that are close to making decisions. We think this tipping point is going to drop ahead of schedule. So that's really positive. And look, just to finish off, I want to share with you, this is the number of monthly active Facebook users worldwide through to 2021 in this particular case. And really what I want to show you is what a growth curve, when you've got the network effect in play, what a growth curve actually really looks like. It's really steep, okay? It's actually much steeper than the growth curve that we're projecting for the growth of our network. And so that tells you that we've set a set of projections that we believe is achievable, but also ambitious. But I think the point is that as we successfully build this network, we can reasonably expect the growth curve could be steeper, okay? It could be a lot steeper because this is typically the network effect growth curve is a really sharp trajectory, okay? So listen, just to summarize for everybody, I've talked a lot today about the growth of the network and the building of the network and why that's so important and why that's a really central focus in everything that we're doing every day. And the good news is that the network is growing, further growth is imminent, and I'm looking forward to sharing the good news with people as those additional partners join, okay? The next point is that the tipping point that gets us to is a major milestone that we think fundamentally changes the growth trajectory in terms of building that network. And that milestone is not only on track, we're ahead of schedule, okay? So early achievement of that milestone, that tipping point milestone looks likely, which is obviously incredibly, we're very excited about. That's very positive. And then the other point I've talked about is the shift to a singular regulatory framework for all 27 markets in Europe or 27 countries. It's a really significant development. I cannot overstate how important that development is. It radically simplifies what we need to provide in the technology for that part of the world. And that part of the world is a really important part of the global opportunity, okay, in terms of their share of the global market. So that's a summary of the presentation. I'm really hoping, people have learned something from the presentation. I'm sure you've heard things that you either didn't know before, or we gave you an update on some of the things that, you were interested in seeing or hearing about. As I said at the beginning, we're going to be providing this update every month. So you'll hear from me in a webinar. That webinar is going to be recorded and shared. You'll get that every month, along with all the other updates that we're providing. And the whole idea of this is that we can bring in relevant developments and share with you metrics. So, the sorts of things I've talked about today, we will continue to update you on each month, but we'll also start to bring in some metrics, some numbers, some facts and figures, so you can get a feel for, in a quantifiable sense, how the business is developing and how we're growing. All right. So look, that concludes the presentation. Thanks everybody for your time. What I want to do now is just share with you some of the questions that came through, and just answer those questions. I'm pleased to say there were some really thoughtful questions that came through. So I've got a number of those questions here that I'm going to answer for you now. The first question relates to, has the Dacxi Chain actually officially been launched? So thank you for that question. The answer is yes. We launched it in the second half of 2023. Now, the official launch was where we essentially said the platform and the business is now officially launched, and we're open for business with partners, and we're seeking partners, and we're working with partners and supporting their integration and collaboration. Okay, so that was all in the second half of 2023. Shortly after that, we announced the first of our partners, which I've again covered in this presentation. That launch last year is not to be confused with what I've talked about as the tipping point. The tipping point is the point at which we go very public with the industry, okay? So not targeting individual partners, but actually announcing to the whole global industry that we are the world's first equity crowdfunding network and what the benefits are for all of the partners that participate, And that's the point at which we start getting those partners coming to us. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. The next question is a really good one, and it is, when can we anticipate the first deal on Dacxi Chain? So look, the answer is we want the first deal to go through as soon as possible. Now that we've got a European partner, we think it could be important to give them the option to be involved in that first deal or those first deals. They're certainly really keen to share their deals with the rest of the network. And the rest of the network is keen to share their deals with everyone else as well. So what it means is that we're collaborating actively at a regular cadence, check-ins with the partners to understand the features that we're developing on the platform. Do they cover and tick every box that they need ticked from a compliance perspective? Not every single thing that they want needs to be in the platform for the first deals to go through. So a lot of what we're doing is working through that detail to say, well, what needs to be in there for first deals and what can we do later that doesn't need to be in there for the first deals, okay? And then making sure that as we build out the platform, the integration points with our APIs, where our partners integrate into our infrastructure, is that all of those updates are flowing through to those connection points and that the integrations are ready and operable to go. So we're going as hard and fast as we can to get to a point where first deals can start to flow, okay? And I can assure you, we'll be talking about that in detail when all of that starts to happen, and it will happen sometime soon, okay? So we're not putting a date on it, but we're saying it's sometime soon. Our partners are really, really keen to get those deals flowing, just like we are. So there's a good alignment of interest from that perspective. The next question, how does Dacxi Chain approach regulatory compliance and navigate evolving legal frameworks? Okay, so this is, I'm so pleased to see this question. It means that, you know, people are understanding some of the complexity that we're solving for with our technology. So the short answer to this question, and the update that I gave in relation to Europe, is a great example of where there's a huge benefit to us around the simplification of those different rules in different markets. The short answer to this is that we don't believe we have to have a perfect answer to every question around how we create a platform that harmonizes across different sets of rules in different markets. We don't have to have every perfect answer for that because our clients do. They operate in those markets. They've been operating in those markets for a period of time. They have a wealth of experience around the compliance requirements and how they best manage to those in their markets. So what we do is we have a program of collaboration where we have structured forums with our partners to dig into specific issues or challenges, and collectively we come up with the solutions to those issues, okay? So this is really, it's a lean in dynamic. Our partners are not just saying, well, I'll sign up and then, you know, let's see what happens. They're actually actively engaging with us to make sure that all of these regulatory requirements are properly considered, and they're considered from every market's perspective in combination with every other market, okay? So if you've got, you know, 5 legal jurisdictions, you've got to make sure that the platform provides for every combination of interaction between those 5 different legal jurisdictions, okay? And that's what we do. And we do that in really close partnership and collaboration with our foundation partners. So hopefully that answers the question for you. The next question is another good one. Is Dacxi Coin being used in the first deals? And so let me answer that really clearly. Dacxi Coin is hardwired into the entire Dacxi Chain proposition. What that means is the first deal will use Dacxi Coin. Every deal that goes through the platform will use Dacxi Coin. There are no exceptions to that, okay? There are no provisos. Every single deal that flows through the Dacxi Chain network uses and relies on Dacxi Coin, okay? Right from the very first deal. That will never change. Dacxi Coin is hardwired into the whole Dacxi Chain proposition. So hopefully that gives you a really clear answer to what is a good question. So look, I've probably taken enough time. Hopefully that gives everybody some information that is useful. We're really looking forward to sharing these updates with you each month, as I said. And please keep the questions coming through to askme@dacxichain.com. We really look at those with interest. It helps us understand the types of issues that you're interested in us talking about, and we'll start to incorporate sensible questions into this monthly update every month. So look, thank you everybody for your interest and your attention. Looking forward to seeing you in the near future, and please keep those questions coming. And we'll talk to you soon. We'll see you all soon. Thanks everybody.